Spanning generations, acknowledgement of the land is a traditional custom of Indigenous people when welcoming outsiders onto their land and into their homes. To build respectful relationships, acknowledging the land is an important part of reconciliation. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we acknowledge we are on and support mentoring for youth in the traditional territories across Alberta of the many First Nations from Treaty 6, 7, and 8, the Métis of the 8 Alberta settlements, and Inuit people whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. These lands are the traditional meeting grounds and homes for many Indigenous peoples for generations. We're grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We are all treaty people, beneficiaries of the peace and prosperity the treaties brought, and committed also to working towards the equity and justice the treaties promised. So before we begin and I introduce more of our special guests, I was hoping that we could put our location, organization into the chat, or Jessica had the wonderful idea that you could even put it in, like change your little title name, and please feel free to add your pronouns while you are at it. This just gives us a little idea of who we're talking to, so we can do a little dancey dance while we're all here and make sure that what we're presenting is the most pertinent to all of you. So my name is Sarah Chan, she, her, L, which I learned from Jessica. I'm the lead of community engagement at AMP, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar. The Alberta Mentoring Partnership, or AMP as we call ourselves, is a mentoring resource organization that's created a network of mentoring agencies, schools, governments, and youth working together to raise the profile of mentoring in Alberta. So we exist to help schools and mentoring agencies meet the needs of the youth and young adults they serve. AMP supports the development of healthy, engaged citizens and can help support your organization or school in strengthening your mentoring program offerings. Our mission is working together to strengthen Alberta's capacity to support and enhance mentoring. Our vision is for young people to thrive through mentoring relationships. This is what we do. I am joined today by a few of my colleagues. I've got Quentin up there, who's our communication and technology administration. He's going to be our tech support today, so if you've got questions or anything, just talk to him in the chat. I'm also joined by Al Chapman, who is our lead of governance and projects at AMP. And I have Pamela Mellon here, and she is our mentoring in schools representative and expert here on the team. And she's also new to the team, so we're really happy to bring her in to meet a lot of our friends. There's going to be Q&A at the end of the session, so if something comes to mind, just put it in the chat, or you can tell us about it later when we're done sharing. But finally, and I did edit this down a little bit, Chris, because some of it was quite a mouthful, because Kristopher Wells is quite an accomplished individual who's been out and about in the community, getting things done for a long time. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Kristopher Wells and Jessica Scalzo from MacEwan University's Centre for Sexual and Gender Diversity. Dr. Kristopher Wells, pronouns he, him, is an associate professor in the Department of Child and Youth Care, Faculty of Health and Community Studies at MacEwan University. He holds the Canada Research Chair, Tier 2, for the public understanding of sexual and gender minority youth, and serves as the founding director for the MacEwan Centre for Sexual and Gender Diversity. Dr. Wells' scholarly work specializes in sexual and gender minority youth, health, education, sport, and culture. He is one of the driving forces behind the creation of many groundbreaking initiatives, including Pride Tape, Camp Firefly, Edmonton Queer History Project, and NoHomophobes.com. Dr. Wells is a frequently invited national and international speaker on sexual and gender minority youth issues. Jessica Scalzo, she, her, L, is the program coordinator for the MacEwan Centre for Sexual and Gender Diversity. She enjoys watching sunsets with her fam jam, freshly baked bread, and smashing the patriarchy. Jessica is a former junior high teacher known for her sweet puns, bold laughter, and incessant striving for a better future. She is especially interested in life at the intersection of queerness and neurodivergence, and is always looking for co-conspirators for the revolution. So welcome, Kristopher and Jessica. I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us more about the center at MacEwan. And Jessica, I know you specifically have a lot of experience with the programs, but since the two of you work together, I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for having us this afternoon. What we're really looking forward to is just to be able to have a conversation with you. We didn't necessarily come in with a formal presentation. We really find a lot of value in just being able to have a dialogue. You know, we know people are coming to this question of mentorship from many different perspectives, backgrounds, some in school, out of school. And so my background, I always like to say by way of introduction, is that I'm a teacher. That's where I started, in the K-12 classroom environment, and really became an accidental professor because youth that I was working with in the community at a lesbian and gay youth group back in the early 1990s, before there were even human rights protections on the grounds of sexual orientation, they really challenged me to say, okay, you're our safe contact now, so do something to make schools better for us. And so that's really what led me back to university, was to be able to get a language and a lens to understand what was happening to these young people in their schools and how they often had to navigate hostile and unsafe hallways and classrooms. So really, the rest of my career was really spent answering those questions and bringing research to bear and evidence-based practice to make a difference in the everyday lives of these young people, so that they could move from a position of trying to survive to a place where they could thrive. And if programs or supports didn't exist, well, we just simply got to work creating them. And, you know, that really ties into this notion of when I was, in university, was also thinking about, what do we need to do on our own campus to build these programs and these centers of excellence, not only to support our university students, but also to apply this research and evidence out into the larger community. So long story short is, I like to say that we're really in the business of social change. So I think Jessica's bio actually got it the best, and in terms of what we strive to do every day, and the kind of the privilege that we have in the university environment. And with that privilege comes a responsibility, to do more, to learn, to engage in challenging conversations, to work with stakeholders and partners to really try to get them the best evidence they can, because it's groups like AMP and others that are out there, that are on the front lines and engaged in supporting these young people. So I was also really, really glad to see AMP's strategic plan and the recognition that our 2SLGBTQ young people are often fail to be able to find mentors to be included in this kind of conversation. And also, the challenge of adults who want to be mentors, but who are dealing with a societal discrimination and prejudice. And we hear words every day now, like, if you're interested in supporting this work, you're a groomer. And, which associates you with being, in child exploitation. And so this creates real barriers for people who want to support these young people. And then it denies these young people from access to important adult mentors, role models, and ability to see themselves and project themselves into the future as happy, healthy, successful adults. And so we really think that this is a real important area, and one that we hear often a lot about, and we strive to do through our own programming, is build these connections through intergenerational mentorship, because students are coming to university and they're looking for these connections, they're looking for these supports. So I came to MacEwan from previous experience at the University of Alberta, just about 5 years ago. And one of the first things we were able to do was to create this new Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity at MacEwan. We really believe that every post-secondary should have a center like this, much like the intentional work that has been undertaken over many years now to support our Indigenous students. We also need to work to look at other students who are dealing with issues of systemic discrimination, unsafe environments, and think about what our institutional and societal responsibilities are towards those groups. And so then as I came to MacEwan and we had this idea for a center, it was quickly about, well, we got to staff it up. And so that's where I had the privilege to connect back with Jessica from some of our previous work over the years in K-12 schools, and she joined the team, and we have one other person who works as our program assistant, Christy Benson. So we have a mighty team of 2 on the ground, and our center went from concept to a reality. We've just celebrated our first birthday in our new physical space on campus, which is also changed the nature of our work as students are now in the space, engaged with the space. We're already running out of space because there's so much demand, but also just hearing from them on an everyday basis really helps to guide a lot of the work that we do. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica to talk more about the heart and the soul of the work that we do every day. And as the students like to say, Jessica and Christy are really also called the center aunties, because they're just there to take care of the students, to give them those supportive referrals, to be able to have a conversation, and just to know that we know regardless of the young people we're working with, whether in K-12 or out in the community, beyond the critical importance of having trusted adults in their lives that they can turn to, right, is a huge source of resiliency for them. So those trusted adults don't often necessarily happen by accident. There's intentionality around creating those spaces to be able to engage, right, in that relationship building and those kinds of, informal and formal conversations and supports that need to be in place. So over to you, Jessica.
Ooh, I don't even know where to start, really. I'm the program coordinator here, so I just get to do really cool stuff all day. It's actually the best job in the world. So I think that our approach to our programming and the work that we do here is really grounded in the belief that community is the antidote to what we're experiencing in our society, that we need to be building stronger connections with one another, and that can help to alleviate the impact of isolation and loneliness and feeling like you don't belong. So we work really hard to provide diverse programming that will appeal to a broad spectrum of people here on campus. Because we serve staff, students, and faculty through the center, a lot of my job is in the realm of education. So I write a lot of resources. I give a lot of presentations, classroom presentations, and otherwise. The busy season has just finally slowed down. I was giving 3 to 5 classroom presentations a week, which is a lot. And I don't do things small. I come in with like full energy all the time, so it's kind of exhausting. But it means I've been away from the space a lot more, and the space really is what is grounds all the things that we do, because we have this wonderful space where people can gather and where we can really focus on building intentional community and benefit from sort of the collective knowledge and wisdom of all the people in our group. It's really, really interesting to be able to sit back and watch a community form right before your eyes as people come in. Often all you need is the invitation, and then once people are there, they can do the rest. And I learn a lot from them all the time. I would say some of our the highlights of our planning, of our programming. Sorry, I'm just looking at my wall that has all my lists on it. One of my favorite things that we have done is a recurring series called the Intergenerational Community Dialogues Project. And so what we do is we invite members of the community to come and give reflections around a certain topic. And it really was born of the need to connect people of various generations or levels of experience from the community. So few young queer folks have queer elders to look up to. And it's not just because of being remote. We don't have a lot of elders that are left. Either they never came out or they haven't survived to this moment. And it's essential for healthy communities for us to build those bridges of understanding. And so we've partnered with the queer seniors group in town that have come in. We've had presentations from the Edmonton Queer History Project. We talk about things like generational perspectives on Pride and what was it like and what's the importance. We're planning a few more for the coming months. One of them is focusing on lesbian history in Edmonton, specifically how lesbian communities really stepped in during the AIDS crisis to provide care and connection when society failed us. And we have another one where we want these generations to come together to talk about gender and their experiences of gender. You know, we see a lot of friction between the generations sometimes. We have our liberation narratives are so different that sometimes it can be hard to communicate between them. And so because of everything that's happened, our young folks have a much different sense of self and identity than generations before because they have access to language, right? And so you have to craft these intentional spaces where people can come and really be prepared to listen and to share what it's like. So yeah, that's one of my favorites. It's a great program. So I'll have to make sure that you folks are all invited next time. Yeah. I'm really good at just sort of word vomiting without end if I'm not given some parameters for what you want to know. So I'm just gonna leave it at that for now.
It's so exciting. Well, and I mean, I'm only seeing the back of your screen, which has some like notes and stickies. So I bet there's, oh my gosh, there's a lot. So I think when we were thinking about inclusivity in schools, we deal with a lot of informal to formal spectrum mentoring. But specifically what we find, and I think I'm preaching to the converted here, but we know that many of our youth that struggle in school to learn, it's not because they don't have the proper faculties and capacities to excel academically. That's not the issue. And we also know that a huge proportion of the youth houseless population is also gender diverse. And so, you know, while we have these kids gathering together in school, you know, what are things that can happen? Because, you know, you're at the institutional level, which is wonderful and there's a mandate, right, to do certain kinds of work. But if you were like a principal in a school or a staffer, like what are some steps that one can take to make schools more welcoming and inclusive spaces?
Yeah, great questions. And I think, you know, it really comes down to this notion that if you feel school doesn't care about you, why would you care about school? And so the importance of creating these safe, inclusive, welcoming, affirming, validating, we ultimately want to get to a place where you know, our schools and communities celebrate these young people for who they are. You know, a lot of the previous language we heard was this notion about tolerance. Well, you know, we'll tolerate you, and I really hate that concept. Like, who wants to be tolerated? Tolerance is a very power-laden concept. It says that, you know, this table is mine, and the only reason you get space at the table is because I give it to you, right? You don't have that inherent right, that innate ability to be, who you are. Tolerance means you always have to fit into somebody else's agenda and their expectations. So, I often say that we can maybe start with tolerance if that gets you in the door, but we can't end there, right? That's only the very beginning. We need to move to acceptance, right? Then the affirmation, and then to the point of celebrating the richness that diversity brings into our lives and our communities in its many wonderful facets. But I think what's really interesting is for people, when we think about this K-12 school environment, oftentimes there's this notion that, well, this is just a small minority of students that we're thinking about here, right? Like when we're talking about the two-spirit LGBTQ plus perspective, and just some latest research that I came across from Edmonton Public Schools, for example. And we know that Edmonton Public Schools is one of the largest school districts in Canada. And so for many years, in my case, I've been working in different capacities with Edmonton Public School Boards and School Board and many others all across Canada over the years. But for about a decade, I've been trying to get the school district to start doing a student demographic survey, so we can actually understand, who are these young people that are in our schools. And so finally in 2022, the board started to ask demographic questions from students across grades 4 to 12. Interestingly enough, though, they would only ask sexual orientation questions of students in grades 7 to 12. So still obviously some work to do, right? That sexual orientation is something, right, innate with us, and it doesn't just appear in junior high, for example. But nonetheless, what they found is for sexual orientation from grades 7 to 12, that about 66.6% of students identified as heterosexual, which meant that almost 26% identified as non-heterosexual, which includes bisexual was the highest category, asexual, pansexual, questioning, queer, lesbian, gay, two-spirit, and other identities that and language that students used. So that's 26% in the sexual orientation spectrum, and about 4.8% said they weren't sure of how they identified. So often we say that's that questioning perspective, but and youth could identify in multiple categories as well. But we're not talking about a small number of students. We're talking about over 25% of the school community. When it came to gender identity in grades 7 to 12, well, 12.6% identified as gender diverse. And so this includes non-binary, which was the highest category, being gender fluid or transgender, or questioning their gender, or being gender non-conforming. And 1.3% were not sure yet. So, you think about, 26% non-heterosexual, almost 13% as gender diverse. We're getting, up there to over close to 40% of students, right, identifying somewhere on that sexual and gender diverse spectrum, which I think surprises a lot of people. Like they think that this is just maybe 1 or 2% of students, or as we've heard in the past, that this is some kind of a trend, fad, or a trend, right, that is not real. And I think that's also why we're seeing a lot of this rise of these so-called parental rights protests that are trying to silence and erase 2SLGBTQ identities from the public sphere. And the way you do that is, first you target schools, what's happening in schools, right? You ban books, you censor curriculum, you deny sort of the diverse realities around you, and you perpetuate and propagate these stereotypes and this misinformation. So, I put that up there because this is young people are increasingly identifying at earlier and earlier ages. The old, a couple decades ago, the message was, well, just wait till you leave high school, or if you're in a rural community, you move away to the big city where there's people like you, right, where you can find communities of support, or wait till you get to that quote unquote liberal university, right? But we know in many ways it's too late. And as Sarah was saying, we see a vast overrepresentation of 2S LGBTQ young people in street involved and houseless. And that is often because the two most significant social organizations or institutions in their lives have failed them. Family, right? And family have rejected them because of their 2S LGBTQ identity. And I've heard terrible things. I've heard to my face, family members say, I'd rather have my kid have cancer than be, gay or lesbian or trans. So our goal really is to try to help these families move from rejecting to accepting behaviors. But okay, so if your family's not supportive and then you go to school, and what happens when you go to school and your school environment is not safe or supportive? Well, then too often what's left for you is the streets. And then we know it's a lot harder to get a kid off the street than to prevent them from being on the street in the first place, right? And once you're street involved, you're couch surfing or you're houseless, all of your negative outcomes start to grow exponentially. And so when we look at research for 2S LGBTQ youth, particularly in the K-12 school environment, we still see that many youth identify their schools as unsafe environments. They still say bullying and homophobic and transphobic language is a major and ongoing issue. It's some of the most commonly heard derogatory language used in schools today and the least addressed by teachers or adults. We have to ask, well, why is that? Why are they quicker to address racist language, perhaps maybe getting better at addressing some sexist language, but do not feel comfortable addressing homo, bi, transphobic language? We also know that when it comes outside of the school environment, that 2S LGBTQ youth are more likely to be targets of cyberbullying as well than their heterosexual or cisgender peers. And so all of this means that they end up having higher rates of skipping school, missing school, dropping out of school, or they often say they tune out, they're pushed out, or they drop out. And it really comes down to the simple question: if school is not safe for you, why would you want to be there, right? And to Sarah's point earlier, it's not around your capacity, to learn or to understand, right? It's about often survival mechanisms. When you're focused on trying to survive, everything else becomes secondary. And then, what's really important for us to understand too is that all of these challenges begin to increase significantly if you're racialized, if you're trans, you're two-spirit, you're non-binary. And so, the reality here is schools are often institutions that continue to perpetuate the status quo, right? So if you're different than the norm, so-called norm, or the status quo, well, the more different you are or you're perceived to be, the more dangerous school is for you. And so, this is really where intersectionality becomes a huge issue. And it was great, again, to see this in the AMP strategic plan. Like, we all need to be paying much more attention to intersectionality. But if we give you the very simple example, if you're an Indigenous youth who happens to be trans or two-spirit, if that's how you identify, if you go back to some parts of your Indigenous communities, well, they might accept you for your Indigenous identity, but they don't accept you for your trans identity. And then if you go to, the 2S LGBT community, well, you still might find that you're experiencing racism because that has been internalized within all of our communities. And so you often feel like, well, there's nowhere for me to turn. I can't go to the 2S LGBT community because I experience racism there, and I don't feel included or safe. Or I go to my Indigenous community and I deal with, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. So I get caught between life worlds where there's nowhere for me to turn to be able to find support. So, we think that that's really important to consider when working with young people, that, they're living often, like all of us, multiple identities at the same time. And this notion of trying to figure out, well, in which part of my life can I be my true authentic self? Where do I have to hide parts of myself to gain acceptance? And then the mental toll and the anxiety it takes of trying to have to manage these multiple facets of your identity all of the time, and constantly. So I just wanted to sort of foreground a little bit of the demographics, the real shift that we're seeing. We often like to say that the future is non-binary, and that's increasingly how young people are identifying. So that can make a lot of perhaps adults and the people who hold the power very uncomfortable, because our society is so based in the male-female binary. Almost everything that we do, most of our knowledge and the way that we interact and engage with the world is based on these assumptions of gender and how we express our gender based upon those societal expectations. So when you just sort of not only want to dismantle those, but throw those away, well, there's real world consequences, for a lot of that. So I think it's and the research has shown us, even over the last decade, when we think we've been making great strides in societal progress on human rights and diversity, schools have remained frozen in time. In many ways, the most successful intervention we've seen over the past decade in K-12 schools has been gay-straight alliances, and the fact that, but you have to remember, those are non-formal, non-instructional, extracurricular spaces, right? It's not what's happening within the curriculum, within the classroom. In many ways, we used to say, actually, before we even had the language of GSAs, that the drama club was the original GSA, right? Like in your school, it was the safe place for the geeks and the freaks, right? In that language, where because the teacher, had created the ground rules, where in fact you were expected not to be yourself, to create this open, accepting space to experiment, right? To build empathy and understanding, to inhabit, right, that character that was different than you. And that was, right, what was deemed as being successful. So I always like to say, it's really, if we could apply more lessons from the drama room to other parts of the school environment, we'd be doing better in that sense.
That kind of reminds me of, and sorry, I have a bunch of things to say, but when we talk about drama and like trying things on, and that makes me think about like improv sort of. But one, the reason why 2SLGBTQ plus identifying youth are part of our strategic plan are because the evaluation conducted about how things are tells us that these are the groups that need mentoring. Same with young men or male identifying youth, regardless of other intersectionalities. Immigrant, refugee, English as a second language, newcomers, they require, like, it's a group of individuals or youth that could really benefit. Indigenous mentoring. So all of these groups of youth aren't identified because it's trendy. In fact, it is. They're identified because they are reflected in research and trends in research. So that's the reason why, because it's a real thing. Two, the frontal lobe development. So like we're talking about just the cognitive development of like young people in general. And then, realizing, we know now that our frontal lobes weren't even like sort of done until we were like 23, 24, 25 years old, if you're male identifying genetically. And so when you have all these young people going through the constant editing, hypervigilance, am I safe? And these are things that are like what we believe and how we say things and the spaces that are created. I don't think it's because there is a bunch of actively uncaring individuals out there looking to ruin life for others, but the binaries that we exist within are quite hardwired. And it's a constant. So, is this a made up thing? No. But then at the end of the day, different kinds of people from all over the place can sit around arguing, well, that's your truth. My truth is a different truth. And we can all sit around until we're blue in the face, arguing about whose truth is a better truth or a more real truth. But at the end of the day, we have young people who are looking for connectivity, like Jessica was saying. They're looking for community. They're looking for aunties. They're looking to go to a place where they know someone's going to care about how they're doing and what's going on for them, right? And so, is there a magic way to be or to say a thing that's going to please everyone everywhere all the time? I think the answer is no, that's a no. But like taking that idea of the drama class, it's okay to try things and it's okay to not get things right sometimes. I think if you're moving forth with a caring and open heart and you're trying, like it's a constant, I'm talking like if you're an educator that doesn't know what to do, or like a leader in a school environment that doesn't, other than being like, oh, let's tolerate things, but not actually then back up what you say your values are versus acting in accordance with those values. I think, something that we can explore here too, and Jessica, I see that your mic's off, is it's okay to not get it perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a few things in here. When I was still teaching in K-12 and through the rest of my various career iterations, I always was involved in some way in work around justice, social justice, etc. And one thing that I noticed throughout all of that work, no matter who I was working with, there was this pervasive belief that until I know everything about something, I can't get involved. And that's hugely problematic. I recognize, because I feel the same, the fear of misstep, the fear of causing harm, of saying the wrong thing, and juxtaposed against these ideas of cancel culture and being viral, like the pressures are real. However, if our compassion depends on our comprehension, we're missing the point of allyship. You do not need to know every single thing. You do not need to have every single term memorized. You do not need to understand the complexities of an individual's gender experience to show up in a good way for them. The most important piece of those are attitudinal. There's no worksheet, there's no magic activity that you can do that's going to solve any issues. It comes down to what are we prepared attitudinally. And so when I do my presentations to across campus, for example, one of the basic tenets, the expectations for participation, is to arrive and to act in good faith and to always assume good intent. And when we talk about good faith and good intent, it means that we're coming with curiosity, we're coming with an open mind, we're coming prepared to be wrong, and we're coming with full accountability. It's very, very easy to detect when someone is not working in good faith. And that's a bit of a protective thing that you develop, right? Just like when someone's leading you with a comment on Facebook, when someone is not asking because they really want an answer. They want to trap you and then berate you. So you have to work so hard at keeping that in check. And I know what it's like for teachers, especially young teachers. Fake it till you make it, don't smile till Christmas, never let them see you sweat. You're expected to be an expert in all things immediately, and people can get really, really defensive when they don't know. And that power dynamic is what is going to close you off from any healthy, productive relationships with your students, especially the ones experiencing marginalization. I think one thing that we all need to understand is that our kids, all of them, are going to know a lot more about this than we do. And just accept it at that. Like, they are the experts because they have been born into these conversations. The language around diversity and inclusion is part of the lexicon that these kids use. Whether they fully understand all the pieces of it, that's a different question. But they are going to know far more about what the vocabulary means, what the nuances are, what the references are, etc. And if you can find a way to let them lead through that knowledge, and you providing, you know, the container in which those things can happen, it's going to change the game. I think the other big thing, and it's always, you know, straight cisgender folks, not just teachers, who ask this, but because gender diversity feels really unrelatable to them because they've never experienced that lack of relatability can be a barrier. And I really encourage everyone, no matter what your gender is to spend time troubling your understanding of your gender. There are so many questionnaires out there that are just lists of questions that give you things to think about, like, how do I define masculinity and femininity? What have I done when I've been misgendered? What does the discomfort feel like? Does it even matter to me? And you might, like, I don't want you to go home and have like a gender crisis unless you already had it planned for a nice Tuesday evening. But the process of asking yourself that and digging deep and being critical of it will do way more to help you to relate to folks, trans or gay, like whatever it is we're talking about, than anything else. And modeling that vulnerability more than anything is modeling that vulnerability. That's what our students want from us. You know, they want to be met with authentic people because that's all that they want, is to be authentic themselves. So, you know, within that, it can be hard to answer, so what do we do, right? Because there isn't a concrete list of steps that you can just check off. It comes down to, how do we position ourselves with the kids who are experts on their own experiences, sit within that humility and discomfort, and then be a vehicle for the things that they want and they need. They just want to be heard and seen, just like the rest of us.
Well, embodying this sounds like it's a practice like any other thing, right? You get good at something by practicing how to do it. And, you know, to get to the level where one is courageous enough to go, you know what, like I'm open to giving myself a challenge because I'm open to maybe what I know about me isn't right. I can imagine that would be very not comfortable for a lot of people. But where do you learn that? So even if you're in a classroom setting or a school setting and you have disagreement isn't a bad thing. Those are opportunities, right? And so that would be the teacher or, you know, someone who's leading to open up that space to say, you know what, it's okay for us to not agree or to not know what the hell is going on. You know, it's okay for us to not have an answer here, but clearly we're all feeling something. So what's going on, right? And even that engage in thoughtful discussion, which doesn't even have to end in agreeing on anything, I think is something that can be modeled, or, you know, whether we're talking about this or something else, right? But can be modeled by educators. I'm thinking about something that there's like a Beyonce meme that she's like, don't just talk about what you're going to do, you know, and don't just say, you know, and don't go complaining about other people not doing the thing. She just says, just go be it. Go be that intention. So it's so epic because going and being it is I think easier said than done. But before we get too carried away with Beyonce, I believe that Chris said something in here. Other Chris. He asks, how do we continue to support students when it seems like there's kickback with understandings? And, you know, because when one thing gets momentum, there's always a swing of the pendulum back and forth, right? So he references some protests and, you know, how do we continue to support students when it gets really noisy out there? Yeah, Chris, Jessica?
For me, it's the worrying of the tide that's becoming more vocal against LGBTQ students and teachings. We were doing really good work with inclusivity, and I agree with Kristopher Wells and read his stuff before about we don't tolerate, we accept and love and understand. But the amount of kickback that we're getting in the communities from that march from the Action for Canada group on September 20th, you hear things about family quote unquote rights that has been happening in New Brunswick and in Saskatchewan. And then we had the last UCP conference, it was mentioned again. Then you hear the kickback that we're getting from not from board at the divisions, getting kickback from families about our Pride weeks and our inclusive education and our inclusive literature we have in our libraries, et cetera, et cetera. I think a lot of teachers are scared. And I'm a principal. I think a lot of my teachers are scared to go too far or to have kickback, or there's even a school in Fort McMurray last year that had protests in front of it because a rumor was made about it, about inclusive resources. So, and I have kids who are transgender, who left my elementary school and gone to junior high and high school, and then they pick up their siblings sometimes, and I felt horrible for some of them because I saw them on the 20th of September. And I asked how they're doing, and they simply said, not well. So how do we protect our kids in this new environment? And we said before, provide resilience. It's getting harder and harder to do that in those environments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I have grave concerns for the safety of the children. I know I sound like a Simpsons character. Think of the children, but I have
But
great
for real,
for the safety of the children in this new environment, which is
it's increasingly,
we're saying we're inclusive, we're not showing we're inclusive sometimes in society.
Yeah,
that worries me.
Absolutely. Yeah, Chris, do you want to start with that?
I absolutely. It's and we, as we were saying, like we see it in our center at the university, right? And this level of anxiety when, right, you're dealing with the manifestations of hate that are showing up and marching on the streets of your community, and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. Or as you said, in schools, when these groups are right, June 1st, when they're doing the Pride walkout, and 30 to 40% of the school in some communities are walking out that day to protest Pride, and teachers that get caught in the crossfire, right, and on the front lines, and they're wondering if they do something, if their administration is going to support them, and then the administration turns around and looks at the school board, right, and the superintendents. And so, right, in this, leadership becomes really important, and holding leaders to account, to walk the talk, right? Nobody said, right, it matters the most when the work is hard, not when it's easy. And that's where we want. And part of what we're trying to do is support those leaders to continue the work, to take the stands, to deal with the resistance. And I'm at the point too where I've talked to school boards and superintendents and say, sometimes, right, you're not going to be able to rationalize with some of these individuals and groups. And
I've given up on rationalizing, Kristopher. It's at the point where some parents, I can't rationalize, and the well-being of my children is more important than trying to convince somebody that their thoughts may not be the best.
Well, and part of it is sometimes, you think about inviting these parents to find another school community, right? That saying, look, we also have to remember what is the role and function of public schools, right? It's not to teach the values that you teach at home. It's to teach the values of what it means to live in a democracy, in a multicultural, pluralistic society. No one parent gets to impose their values on an entire school community, and that becomes hard, right, to sometimes have these kind of conversations. And I say, your job as a parent is, when we're talking about these issues in the curriculum, you get to go and have those conversations with your child around your dinner table, right? Like, nobody is preventing you from having these conversations and sharing your values and your beliefs. But when we get into a public school, that's a school that needs to be there for everyone. And part of it is, them not understanding, or it being, not wanting to hear about, to Sarah's point, like, well, let's look at the facts. Let's look at the stats. Let's look at the research evidence to show, like, who is at risk in these communities. What disheartens me the most is, the preying on these vulnerabilities of cultural minorities through particular faith-based and religious groups. And I often say to them, well, careful who you get in bed with, because tomorrow they're going to be coming after you, right? Like,
well, that was the Action4.ca group. They have, we had a lot of families from different faiths who were marching against this family rights thing. And then you look at the Action4.ca webpage, which I researched, and then what do you see? They have a policy against some faiths. I'm not going to say what the faith is, but there's some very clear policies stating against the faith. So it's a mess.
Yeah, and it's scary because we're seeing, the political now environment pick up on this, and we're seeing, the rise of populism and right-wing extremism. To your point about, the UCP policy resolutions, they want to get rid of all EDI work on post-secondaries, and you can be sure after that they're coming, right? They've already announced they're coming after school boards, and they're orchestrating, campaigns to get their people elected at school boards to stifle any of these conversations and this work. So it is a dangerous and scary time, but you know what that means? You got to mobilize. You got to, you've got to get people engaged in the political processes, whether that's in the parent council, all right, or the school board, or your municipal elections, or your provincial elections. And my message to youth also is you have power, right? You've got the power. The youth are the ones who, for the most part, don't really see these as issues or problems, because this is part of the world that they've grown up with, but they're not the ones who hold the power and the decision making. So there is these generational, disconnects. So, never underestimating these young people and their voices as well. And how can we support them, right, to have that agency to speak out, and in some cases, right, to organize and fight back against, right, these, as we say, these dark forces that are looming on the horizon. Because this is not, right now, it's a large focus on the 2SLGBT community, but this is not a 2SLGBTQ issue. This is a fundamental human rights issue, and how we understand diversity and difference in our society. And all we have to look at, where do you think population growth in Canada and Alberta particularly is coming from? It's not coming from within, it's coming from minorities from across the world who are coming here, right? So our province is only getting more diverse, not less diverse, and we choose to ignore or suppress diversity at our own peril.
Well, and it's very, the more, we have our new population coming, there's everywhere, any place where somebody came from has difference. For example, I'm Chinese, so people be like, everybody's Chinese. I'm like, there's a lot of different kinds of Chinese people. But the two things can be true at the same time. And one is that it's scary and difficult. And in some sense, it's like, ooh, where does my hope supposed to come from, right? But also what Chris was saying, the other thing that's also true is that this grappling with the difference and evolution and kind of the arc, like Jessica was saying, that the language now is so different as well, and that it's going to be young people teaching us. They're much more fluid, and meaning they think really quickly too, because things are changing really quickly in their world. And it's also true that that's pretty exciting. And it's also true that we're not in exactly the same place we were before. There are many different angles to look at. I'm going to let Candace ask her question or say her thing before we wrap up.
Are you sure, Chris, that you're good to go? I didn't interrupt you, Chris Organ?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good. I talk a lot anyway, so I'm fine.
No, this has been really helpful. I appreciate it. I'm from a community agency, and we provide programming to all kinds of youth, and we have quite a bit of diverse youth. And I myself am a parent of a queer youth, and still this topic scares me. I'm always scared to get it wrong, even though I have been surrounded by queer youth for probably now 12 years. And so I can appreciate how it scares other people quite a bit. And so part of our agency, part of my question is that we've been looking for the right training. Okay, so not just vocabulary, but like you said, those nuances, the information, references, so on and so forth. And we have come across no training that meets what we believe are the needs. And so one of my questions is do you know of any training that as an agency we could have more information for our staff to best support these youth? And then as I was listening to you guys, it came to mind that maybe the people who are training us are the youth. And so maybe we're creating a like we had at the AMP summit where the youth presented, right? There was 3 youth that presented, and they could tell us and train us. Anyways, that came to mind as I was listening to everything you guys were saying. So I don't know, there's a couple things there that I'm saying.
I think that's a really good idea. But Chris, Jessica, do you want to weigh in on the training? Where can, obviously there's not going to be one magic thing that makes everyone get it and woo, we can all ride off into the sunset together, but where do we start?
Yeah, and that's a very complex question, actually, is like getting the good presentations in. And just as we try to teach media literacy and question the source and everything, there's that's a major part of how we choose people to come and do these presentations. Like, I would be hesitant to invite a well-meaning white lady to teach me about racism, right? Like, it's the same kind of thing. So you want to look for organizations that are embedded in the community, that are working hard within your community where you are. And also to part of the issue is that there are a lot of people who can talk very eloquently about these things, but they can't do it for free. And when they're not connected to an agency or an organization, it can be really, really difficult. I could list a dozen people who I think would probably just knock your socks off, but they don't come with the same kind of credentialing or organizational institutional powers. So it can be a real struggle. The people pleaser in me wants to offer my services, but I am way too busy with my own job. But lots of like on our campus, for example, I'm currently training some student volunteers to be able to do more workshops. The student groups at different universities, the queer student groups, like they often can speak. I think what we need to get away from is thinking that one workshop or in-service is going to be enough, and that we need to have these conversations recurring, and it needs to be embedded in the things that we're doing. So, like I could have a group of students be there tomorrow and they could talk about their gendered experiences, but that's still not going to answer the questions about what if I get a word wrong, right? So it's going to require a little bit of thinking about how we provide those learning opportunities differently, without it being onerous to the individuals in your workplace, because they already have lots to do. And as far as like that fear of making mistakes, I get it. However, the mistake is often the smallest part of that situation. It's what you do when you make a mistake that really matters, and becoming really good at understanding how you build a proper apology, and how you're able to transition from that and take accountability for your mistake tells us way more about you as a person than using the wrong term to begin with. Because so many people, out of embarrassment or whatever, will just double down or be dismissive instead of being like, you're right, I have a lot more to learn, thank you, I'm going to make sure I get it right next time. So there's a lot of humility involved in doing this kind of work and learning.
That's the building of resiliency that you were talking about in the chat. Chris, final words before we wrap this up.
I just threw a couple of resources in the chat there to, I think, align with the conversation we've been having. Did a little piece in the conversation on 5 ways to be a better ally towards the 2SLGBT community, and that is partly in response to what Chris was raising. When we're in these times, these challenging times. Now we also need more allies to step up alongside the community. You can't expect the community to bear the brunt of this hate and work on its own, right? I like to say that, you know, in hard times, challenging times, good allies don't back down, they double down, right? And that's what we're looking for, is that those authentic allies who are there, right, when we need them the most. So and then, you know, for some excellent organizations, Skipping Stone focuses a lot on gender diversity and trans and non-binary young people. They're based in Calgary, but to Jessica's point, they're an organization for and by trans, you know, individuals, and incorporate a lot of youth voice into what they do. And they offer some virtual programming and supports, even some virtual counseling all across the province. So they're a real go-to organization. And as Jessica said, we're very cautious around who we partner with too, right? And you know, wanting to invest deeper in existing organizations and building that capacity and the ability and the support to continue to expand the work. Because too often it's like with bullying, you know, everybody will say they're doing bullying prevention work, but very few of it is evidence-based and successful. We'd rather invest in fewer organizations and much more deeply to bring about the systemic kind of change that we want. And that's my problem with a lot of grantors and government funding, is they just want to spread money around to everyone. And you know, we just end up getting duplication, and we stay at a very shallow surface level. And the real change that needs to happen is an investment that needs to happen over time, right? And deepening the relationships and the connections and the work. So just again, thank you for the opportunity to chat with all of you today. Both Jessica and I and Kristi at the center are always happy to have further conversation, try to connect you to resources and supports out there. And if you're ever on the MacEwan campus, please feel free to come and stop by. We love visitors, and our students love visitors as well, and chatting with people, and get to see this amazing space, and come and have some tea with our aunties.
I love it. Well, we're so fortunate that we got to have I think, a really real conversation, and that, you know, this is not just, we're not going to solve all these problems in an hour. This is an introduction and an invitation to be allies together, to continue paying attention to what's going on, and to continue finding a community where we can talk about how we don't know, or how much more there is to learn, or to also learn about history and process, and to be able to have a safe space to be able to express ourselves and our fears and our hopes, because it kind of comes in a giant bundle. But I think nobody would disagree with saying that, you know, we're here for our youth and for the healthy development and community building and resiliency and, you know, nurturing of these wonderful young people. And, you know, it's a complex world, but what we're trying to do is I actually feel like, in some ways, I'm like, isn't everyone just kind of on the same page? But whatever. There's many different pathways that work for some and others, but we are a diverse place. This is a diverse world, and, you know, the classrooms are a really exciting place to see the potential of these young people. So we look forward to being able to have more conversations in the future. Quentin has saved our chat, so I'll go through it tomorrow, make sure I've got those links, and I'll send out those links and maybe take some notes so that we can jam on them later, or you can circulate them to other individuals. Yeah, we're always we'll have a recording of this in our newsletter, so you can sign up for that, or follow us, where we'll also let everyone know that this is happening. Yeah, and it just heartens us, it like warms our hearts that, you know, you decided to spend your time with AMP this afternoon. I am usually teaching music during this time, so I am typically not at these, but it was a real treat that there's no school today, so here I am. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.